What is good, everyone? Welcome to the channel. This is me, Paul, and I know you can't see me, but that's because I decided to do a driving video this week rather than a walkabout video, and the reason is very simple. It is still 30 degrees Celsius or 90 degrees Fahrenheit outside, and I decided doing a driving video from the comfort of my air-conditioned vehicle would be a really great way to go. So today, enjoy a slightly different view of Japan as I drive through the countryside rather than walk through it. Today's video installment are the final stories about my mysterious experiences or strange or weird things that I've encountered in Japan. And that first set of stories that I told 2 weeks ago was about interesting or weird things that happened to me. Today's story is going to focus on interesting, weird, and even amazing people that I have met in Japan. So if you're interested in these stories, this is your second, but unfortunately final installment for now. As of next week, I will be getting back to my more regular content. If you're more interested in that sort of video, that will be coming back next week. Okay, today's stories, I have 4 of them. The first one is going to be about absolutely the most bizarre person that I've met in Japan, or encountered rather. And the final story, which I hope you stick around for, is actually talking about 3 different groups of people and why they represent the sort of empathy and conscientiousness and helpful nature of the Japanese people in 3 different forms. So if you want to get a little of that cultural context, that'll definitely come out in the 4th story. But first, let's start with the story about absolutely the most bizarre experience I've had meeting someone in Japan. This story takes place in Matsumoto, Nagano. I was there for a conference. It's a castle town in the middle of Nagano Prefecture. Very beautiful, wonderful castle. It's all original. It wasn't harmed in World War II at all, so it's not a reconstruction. Highly recommend visiting Matsumoto if you get the chance when you're in Japan. But also in Matsumoto is a Ukiyoe, or Japanese woodblock print museum. And if you know my channel at all, you know I'm very interested in Japanese woodblock prints. I have my own collection. I've made a few videos on this topic. I'll link those below if you want to hear about my collection. While I'm in Matsumoto, I decided, well, there's an Ukiyoe museum. I should really go check it out. When I got there, I realized that it was a fairly new structure, but also quite small. And the museum inside was not very large, but the exhibit was very nice. They had some very much museum quality Hiroshige prints on display, as well as some 20th century Shinhanga prints. And I was enjoying my time walking around looking at these different Shinhanga and Ukiyoe. I was there for about 5 or 6 minutes when there was an announcement over the loudspeaker in the place. And I could see the gentleman behind the counter, because as I mentioned, this place is quite small. The person who had sold me the ticket to get in was making an announcement, and he said there was going to be a special presentation in 10 minutes. And I thought, okay, that could be interesting. And I continued perusing the exhibit. And when the time came, he walked around the exhibit and ushered all of us up a stairway to the 2nd floor, where there was not any exhibit, but there was a circle of chairs around a screen with a projector. I thought it was interesting that he insisted that everyone be a part of this presentation. He didn't leave or allow anyone to stay down on the 1st floor. And I thought, well, maybe it's a security measure, and he seemed to be the only employee there, or maybe he was the curator. It wasn't entirely clear to me, but he wanted everyone up on the 2nd floor for this presentation. Okay. This is, I want to say, well over 12, 13 years ago. And at this point, my Japanese is all right, but it's not fluent or really all that great yet. So I was wondering how much of this presentation I was actually going to understand. So he begins the presentation, and it was pretty much what you would expect. It was slides of ukiyo-e prints. He started off with some Hiroshige, I think I remember that correctly, and he was giving an explanation of what the print was and information on the artist and the subject of the print, etc. But as the presentation went on, almost every other slide, instead of being a woodblock print, was some kind of lithograph or some kind of old sketch or something that you would have maybe found out of a newspaper in the 19th century. And I wasn't really catching all that he had to say, but all of these other lithographs and things were clearly not anything to do with ukiyo-e. So I was wondering what he was on about and was struggling to try to understand what he was saying. And I realized part of the problem was he had clearly translated some Japanese into English and was actually trying to say these parts in English. But clearly he was not actually an English speaker. He had turned all of this English into the katakana syllables. He was speaking with such a strong Japanese accent that I was actually having a better time understanding his Japanese than his attempted English. It gradually dawned me what he was on about, because he was talking, interspersed with real ukiyo-e Japanese woodblock print slides, he was talking about the slave trade. And in the end, I understood that his overall thesis was that the Japanese were unique and special and better than Westerners because only the Japanese had never engaged in the slave trade. I realized at that point that the Japanese people around me, there was about maybe 8 to 10 Japanese who were watching this presentation, everyone seemed a little bit uncomfortable and it was all very odd. And I'm pretty sure, especially because of the English he was using, or the attempted English I should say, it was pretty obvious that he'd put this presentation on because I was there. And so I had this distinct impression that if I had not been at the museum that day, probably the rest of the Japanese patrons would have just looked at the woodblock prints and gone home. But because I was there, he needed to put on his presentation about how Westerners were evil because they'd engaged in the slave trade. And I'm sitting there not really knowing what I should do or what I should say, if anything. And I just ended up doing nothing, finishing the presentation. I didn't talk to anyone. I went down, looked at some prints, but kind of because of the vibe, decided to get out of there. And yeah, the whole experience was a little off-putting, to say the least. Now, in hindsight, maybe if my Japanese had been better, I might have done something cheeky like raised my hand and said, oh, well, what about in World War II when the Japanese brought over Korean slaves to work for the war effort? Who knows how well that would have gone down, but at any rate, yeah, that was easily one of the oddest experiences I've had by a Japanese who clearly had some kind of axe to grind. Okay, to keep in the same vein of very strange behavior, this next story actually involves a mystery person. I don't know who the culprit is in this story, but I think it's interesting to speculate who it might be or why they might have done what they did. But here's the story. I used to live in a town called Hayama in Kanagawa Prefecture, and Hayama is a very kind of boutique, bougie little town. A lot of rich people in Tokyo have their summer homes down there. It's a beach town. They had very strict garbage sorting rules in this town. And basically there were 6 pickup days for garbage. 6 days of the week they had a different pickup day because of the many, many rules. And one of the rules was you were supposed to sort out recyclable paper. So if you had any kind of paper products that weren't soiled in some way, and they had the kami, the kanji for paper on it, you were supposed to put it out on this particular day. And dutifully, the day came and I took my kami out to the trash collection point. I was a little bit late that day, so I was one of the last people to put my trash out. And I remember my trash bag was a paper bag, bright yellow, from the Hatosabure company. The Hatosabure, they make these pigeon-shaped cookies that are very popular as a gift for anyone who's traveled to Yokohama, Kamakura area. They sell these Hatosabure cookies, and the bag that they come in is this bright yellow bag with the pigeon on it. So I put that on the very top of all of the other paper garbage, and I went back to my apartment. About 5-10 minutes later, I came out. I'm on my way to work. I'm going to go catch the bus. But I'm not in any particular hurry. I've got time. And as I passed the trash heap, I realized, my bright yellow bag is not on the top anymore. And as I'm noticing this, I just happened to see that the trash truck is pulling up to pick up all of the paper trash. And so I decided to stop and wait and see what happened to my bag. Did it fall off the back or what happened? And the trash collectors came out and they started throwing all these recyclable paper products into the back of their truck. And as I watch, they end up throwing everything, all of the bags of trash, into the back of the truck, and my yellow bag was not there. Sometime in the 10 minutes I was back in my apartment, someone had come and taken my paper trash. Now, I have 3 potential theories as to what might have happened here. The first is it might have been a neighborhood busybody checking that the foreigner had properly sorted his garbage, because that can often be a stereotypical sticking point in Japanese society, that foreigners don't know how to sort their garbage correctly. The second theory is it could have been someone attempting identity theft. It is a possibility in Japan. It's not like Japan is a crime-free country despite its safety reputation. Third possibility, unfortunately, came from a coworker who was having a go and said, "I'll tell you what, Paul, right now there's some middle-aged man in his underwear rolling around in your paper trash and squealing." I really, really hope that's not. I really, really hope that that's not what's happening. My third story happened just recently. On a business trip to Fukui, I went to a conference in Fukui Prefecture. For some context, Fukui is known as the 3rd least visited prefecture by foreign tourists. So other than long-term foreign residents who might be there, they don't get a lot of outside foreigners visiting Fukui. So maybe that made a difference here, I'm not sure. But I met my friend and we went out to dinner and we decided we want to have further drinking and entertainment, and we were having a good time, and we decided to go to a snack bar where they had karaoke. Now, if you're not familiar, snack bars they look like a regular bar, except there's usually a table charge, there's always karaoke, there's always kind of regulars, and it's a very Japanese feeling establishment. It's not really your typical bar like you would think of it in the US. So we enter this snack bar, and the master immediately puts down some snacks in front of us, takes our drink order, hands us the karaoke remote control that allows us to pick our karaoke choices, and then he starts to serve another customer. There's a group of salarymen or businessmen who are behind us at a table, obviously having a good time. Everyone's a little bit amused that some foreigners have walked in, because that probably doesn't happen very often. I'm fiddling with the karaoke remote control. I'm going to put in a song to sing, when I realize the place has kind of gone silent and that the master has said something that I missed because I was paying attention to what song I was going to choose. And he takes the microphone and stares at the two of us and then belts out a really well done rendition of Bohemian Rhapsody. I mean, he did a really good job. Clearly this was an English song that he practiced, probably a big Queen fan. What made it weird though is there was a very strong passive-aggressive vibe coming from him as he was looking at us, and it wasn't like he was smiling and enjoying it. It was absolutely that he was showing off to these foreigners. My friend and I talked about this afterwards, and we were saying, was that the most passive-aggressive bar owner you've ever met? And we both agreed that that had to be the case. Luckily, my song came up next, and I had put in a song by the Blue Hearts, a Japanese rock band from the 90s, and I'd chosen the song Rinda Rinda. And it's a song that I've sung many times at karaoke. I'm pretty good at it, and I brought the house down singing in Japanese. When I say I brought the house down, I mean I brought the house down for the salarymen and the couple other customers in the bar. It was pretty clear that the master, the bartender, wasn't as pleased about my performance as everyone else. And this manifested in a few ways, that he was very quick to try to bring us new drinks, like, spend more money. At one point, my friend got up to try to talk to another group of people that had come in later, and the bartender came over and shooed him away. He's like, no, you stay in your set place, don't join other groups. Which, yeah, snack bars have different rules than regular bars, but if a group is ready to welcome you in and talk to you, there's no rule against moving seats in a normal snack bar. So clearly this guy was throwing his weight around. And the other thing that kind of put this all into perspective was either the master's wife, or at least the mama-san, the woman who worked with him, was very apologetic, even walking out the door with us at the end and kind of apologizing to us over the master's behavior. While I would say we both had a good time, it was a very odd and weird experience. And my advice to anyone who wants to try out a snack bar, or even just go to a karaoke club with some Japanese, I highly recommend having at least one Japanese song that you can sing, because you'll bring everyone that's important to your side, you'll bring the house down, everyone will be appreciative of the fact that you can do a Japanese song, and well, everyone except maybe that master in the snack bar in Fukui. All right, the fourth and final story, as I mentioned before, this I look to as a story of Japanese conscientiousness and the Japanese willingness to help others who are in need, but how that conscientiousness can manifest in different ways that can be actually incredibly helpful, less than helpful, and absolutely not helpful at all. Okay, the story starts off at the very beginning of my Japan life. I had just moved to Japan. I'd been here for less than a month, but it had been my intention to join a martial arts class in Machida, Tokyo. I'm living out in Yamanashi Prefecture at the foot of Mount Fuji, the north slope of Mount Fuji to be precise. Keep in mind, this is over 20 years ago. This is before smartphones. This is before Google Maps. Figuring out how to get the trains and buses that I need to make it to Machida, Tokyo is not an easy feat. Even the internet at this time did not have a whole lot of information in English about Japanese train schedules, train lines, etc. Almost everything was still pretty much Japanese language exclusively, and at this point, I'm newly arrived to Japan. I've got basic greeting Japanese at best. So the first thing I do, naturally, is I go to my employers, the Board of Education, and say, I have this class that I want to go to in Tokyo. How do I get there? And it turned into a session of a lot of ちょっと難しい, it's difficult. And in the end, they decided, sorry, it's too difficult, you shouldn't go. And they wouldn't help me. Now that sounds like a really poor result. That really sounds like them being obstinate. But the way I understand it now is they were thinking about me. They were looking out for me. This was empathy on their part. They were thinking of this foreigner who doesn't speak any Japanese, who can't read any Japanese. He's going to try to get to Machida, Tokyo. And we're in charge of him. This is someone that we are responsible for. And it would be irresponsible of us to allow him to try this trip. So the answer was just no. Well, unfortunately for them, I was not going to take no for an answer. I was going to make it to this class. I have no memory of how I figured it out, but I made it to the class. And I remember it was actually a trouble-free trip. I managed to do my train transfers, catch the bus. Everything went pretty well. So I attend the class. I meet all the people who are in this class, and these are people who I would come to know very well over the next 3 years because I attended this class regularly. At the end of the class, they were all concerned with how I was going to return to Yamanashi. Up to this point, I just assumed that I would do a backtracking of what I'd done before. Okay, this is how I got to Machida to begin with. I'll just backtrack my steps, and I'll get back to my home in Yamanashi on the north slope of Mount Fuji. Well, they seemed to think that that was the most inefficient way, and that it made more sense for me to go to the south side of Mount Fuji, to the city of Gotemba, and then head north from there, because they felt that, well, going back up north to the Hachioji Takao western area of Tokyo and then heading into Yamanashi that way was somehow more inefficient. One of them had a train map in their car, it's a physical paper map that they had in the glove compartment of their car. They brought it up to the classroom and they decided, okay, Paul should take this train and he should head here and he'll be fine. And so one of the members took me in their car, very nicely gave me a ride to a different station than the one I had arrived on. And they said, okay, take this train and just ride it to the very end and you'll get to Gotemba, and then you'll be able to head north to the northern part of Mount Fuji, Fujiyoshida city, from there. And I said, okay, that's what I'll do. And I got on the train and I dutifully rode to the last stop, but I didn't realize it was the last stop at first. We stopped at this really countryside train station, and I mean countryside. There was nothing around this train station. There weren't many people on the train at this point. Most people had gotten off at prior stations, and so when the 2 or 3 people got off the car I was in, I didn't think anything of it. I was just waiting for the train to start up again, and I waited for the train to start up again. And then the conductor came into the car and said, oh, this is our last stop. This train isn't going any farther. He didn't speak English. My Japanese wasn't very good, but it was clear to me I needed to get off the train. So I got off the train. He made it clear to me that this was the last train. There would be no more coming, and there would be no more continuing on from here. And I was definitely not in Gotemba. So this is the example of the second set of conscientiousness. The class members of this Japanese martial arts class really took it onto themselves to help me and protect me and help me find the best way home. They did the best they could. They just didn't know that they had led me to a complete dead end in the middle of nowhere. And I would never blame them for that. They were trying their best to help someone that they felt was now under their care, because I was still that clueless foreigner who didn't speak Japanese and didn't read Japanese and needed all the help that he could get. Unfortunately, their help turned out to be worse than no help at all. So I'm standing outside of this train station, and there's a vending machine and a parking lot and darkness. And I'm thinking, what am I going to do now? There's nothing here. There are no more trains. Am I going to sleep in the train station tonight? That's when the final car in the parking lot pulled out and stopped in front of me. And inside this car was a Japanese woman with her daughter, and I clearly looked completely lost and completely clueless. And she could speak some English, and she asked me, what's going on? Where are you going? And I explained that I had been trying to get to Gotemba. And she said, oh, Gotemba is still about 1 hour from here. And I thought, oh, no, 1 hour? Now what am I going to do? And she said, oh, I'll drive you there. And I reacted like, really? You would drive me all the way to Gotemba? And she said, sure, take you to Gotemba. Now remember this, it's about 9-10 at night. This is a woman and her teenage daughter. I'm standing alone, a white foreign male who's literally carrying a weapon, because this was a Kenjutsu sword class that I was doing in Tokyo. And she was willing to help me at this time of need. The conscientiousness, the empathy, the sympathy, in this case, of this Japanese woman was, I can't help but be forever grateful to her, because she drove me 45 to 50 minutes all the way to Gotemba Station, where there was a business hotel that I could stay, and I could catch the next bus in the morning to Fujiyoshida. And I only missed like the first hour of work, which was unfortunate but couldn't be helped. But this woman went way out of her way to take me to Gotemba Station. I have no idea where she was going in the end. I have no idea how out of the way Gotemba Station was or wasn't for where she and her daughter were headed. But I have to believe it was probably nowhere close to where they were planning on going. So we're talking past 10 p.m. at night when they were going to get to whatever their destination was. always grateful to them. I'm sure she or her daughter will never watch this video, but in case they do and they think, hey, that was us, I remember giving that random foreigner a ride 20 years ago. If you're watching this, thank you so very much. So the story of 3 different groups of Japanese being as helpful as they could be to different effects. I will never ever forget those days of my life, and I am forever grateful and happy for these memories that I managed to obtain. And I'm also grateful to you who have listened to all of my stories. If you would really like to hear more stories in the future, let me know in the comments below, and I will look to make more videos like this in the future, perhaps as a midweek video in addition to my normal Saturday videos. If that is amenable to you, let me know in the comments. Otherwise, thank you so very, very much for watching this particular video, and I will catch you on the next one. Peace.